This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, Variety magazine actually tells the truth about President Biden's chat with Seth Meyers, and it is ugly. We talked to filmmaker Mike Nayna about his new docuseries, The Reformers, and how he gambled on woke academia and won. And we share a shocking attack on an unwoke and very pregnant comedian.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we kick things off, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes each Wednesday, plus bonus episodes coming in hot. If you like what you hear, could you give us a review over at iTunes? Every word helps. Thank you. Well, if you listen to the show for any amount of time, you know the press's liberal biases extend to arts coverage. No doubt about it. But what Variety magazine did this week was different, almost shocking. You might even call it journalism. The outlet covered President Biden's visit to Late Night with Seth Meyers. And, of course, the 81-year-old president looked and sounded like an 81-year-old president suffering from some mental decline. Now, that's no state secret. We all know it, except the reporters who were trying to cover up the truth. Now, a lot of journalists reported on this appearance. It cherry-picked some quick little comments from Biden. It framed it in a very positive, upbeat way. Not Variety. They did something different. They told it like it was. I told you this was going to be shocking, right? Here's the headline. President Biden's late night appearance indicates the tough road ahead. That's just brutal. And it gets worse. Here's a quote from the story. Biden's decision this year to skip the annual Super Bowl interview for the second time in a row felt either like a missed opportunity to reach a wide audience or like a concession that he wasn't up to it. Think about that. The commander-in-chief, the most powerful man in the free world, may not be up to a softball interview. It just boggles the mind. But there's more. This is also from the Variety story, talking about how Biden did with Seth Meyers. Well, he stayed on message. He volleyed back a joke made to him, if woodenly. He came out alive. Wow! Impressive! Breaking news. President Biden survives softball interview with the late-night clown. Take that, Trump. I'm kidding, but, we're at the point where even the subservient press just can't cover up Biden's condition. It's sad. In a perfect world, we wouldn't be talking about this. We certainly wouldn't be making fun of President Biden. We'd be wishing an elder statesman well as he goes into retirement and spends more time with his family. But he and his administration and the press are pretending that all is well. That's why he's ripe for ridicule. Sorry, it's true. And just note, we're about 9 or so months away from the actual presidential election. For Biden, things are going to get worse. And I bet soon some more entertainment journalists will have no choice but to tell the truth or something like it. If they don't, any semblance of respect they have for their work and their readers will be out the window. Here's your movie trivia question of the week. This is Spinal Tap gave us the first great big mockumentary. I think it's still the very best of its kind. All these years later, it's just a great achievement. Of course, the film captured the rise and fall of a hair metal band led by David St. Hubbins. That's the lead singer played by Michael McKean. Love the performance. He is great. Underrated for sure. Of course, the band's humiliating downfall was captured later in the film when they got second billing at a county fair gig. Now, playing a county fair gig when you're this big rock band, that's embarrassing. But what act trumped the tap on the event's marquee? The answer? At the end of the show. Imagine creating a research paper out of thin air and getting an academic journal to publish it. Now, imagine that happening again and again and again, 7 times in total. Well, that's the backstory behind The Reformers. It's a 5-part docuseries that follows that academic hoax that was perpetrated by James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose. Is that the greatest name in the world, Pluckrose? That's amazing. They worked together. They created these fake papers that were mocking today's woke mindset. One of the papers actually paraphrased elements of Mein Kampf. Yeah, that's Hitler's little ditty. Remember that one? Well, the hoax was called the Grievance Studies hoax. And it exposed the intellectual rot that was going on in academia better than anything could. And it turns out that filmmaker Michael Nayna was there to cover it all. His docuseries, The Reformers, captures that story from start to finish. And if you need a tease, well, let me quote one of the paper's titles. It was dubbed Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks. Just can't make it up. But they did, and they got away with it. It's just amazing. But how did Michael get the story from the start? Did he or his colleagues face any violent attacks for their work? In case you haven't noticed, the woke left, they like to break some stuff now and then, and they like to hurt people now and then as well, at least try to. And what about Michael's plan? What if none of the academic journals bid on all those fake papers? What was his plan B? It's all here in this fun and alarming chat with the Reformers filmmaker, Michael Nayna. Mike, thanks for joining the show. I want to start where else, the beginning. When did you first decide to track the team behind the Reformers? And it seems like you were there at the very beginning. So walk us through that process, because it's fascinating.
Well, I started looking into this stuff in Australia well before the project came into conception, I guess. So I saw what has, I guess, since become known as the Great Awakening, a kind of cultural revolution that was taking place all over the world, really. And I noticed it in my job in the news. I was a news cameraman, and I tracked a lot of protests here in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. And it was clear to me that something new was happening there. The protests in Melbourne used to have a very pointed, I guess, mission. They had a list of things that they wanted, and they went there to ask for them. And then it was a bit after social media started having an effect on the world, where the groups of different kinds of people would meet just to complain generally, I guess. It was kind of like to fight the right, and you would go to these protests, and there'd be signs for all sorts of things. So it wasn't very discernible what was going on, and they were more radical. There was all sorts of strange language being used, consistent but odd. I didn't really know what it was. And then in the other part of my life in filmmaking, it was clear that how would you say, the editorial vision of the funding bodies became quite tight. So they started looking at identity issues to the exclusion of all else, really. You had to kind of do absurd comedy stuff, or stay out of documentary or tracking anything real, or you had to talk about identity issues, or you could try to talk about something else and then shoehorn identity issues in. So there was this kind of top-down editorial shift in the film industry, and it was everywhere I looked, I guess. So I wanted to figure out what this thing was, and so I tracked the concepts and the language back to the university, and by actually hanging out with protesters and speaking to them about, well, what is this? What is this word? What is heteronormativity? What is that? What is this? And they all seem to have read a similar set of texts, and they seem to come from these cultural studies departments, the more radical, you would say. And so I started sitting in on lectures and started trying to figure out what this thing was, because if it's going to, I guess, police my world, the morality of my world, I'd better figure out what the hell these guys are talking about.
Absolutely. And
I found the inside the gender studies and the cultural studies discipline, the academics to be quite standoffish. And I mean, it could get quite tense just asking basic questions, because to me at that point, I wasn't even critical of it. I didn't like it. I didn't like that I was being pushed and pulled, but I wasn't sitting in these lectures or asking these questions with any kind of, how would you say, animosity. I was genuinely just trying to understand it, but I found them quite standoffish and difficult to they wouldn't answer questions, I guess.
Yeah.
We'd be going around in circles. And so I started getting second opinions and started talking to other academics. And I noticed that this thing that I was looking at was like Voldemort. It's the problem we shall not talk about. And there was a few very, very strange experiences, like one professor, we would have a conversation on his official university email account. And then as it started to get into the kind of nitty gritty of the problem we were talking about, he would move me to his personal account. And then another professor I sat with, I went to his office, and he opted. He said, can we go down the road to a cafe? So I met him at his office, and we're walking to the cafe, and he said, I just don't feel comfortable speaking about this stuff.
Wow.
In his office. And when you would speak to these people about it, they were extremely passionate about it, but it was clear that they were holding their opinions and views on these things very quietly, and they were quite scared of whatever this Voldemort entity was that I was trying to figure out. And eventually, I guess what you would say was, speaking to a lot of these people, I kind of fell into an intellectual underground. And so one academic or professor or researcher would send me to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. And there was this thing behind the scenes, a network of intellectuals and academics who had been tracking this problem for a long time and quite passionate about it, but they wouldn't speak publicly about it. And that eventually led me to Peter Boghossian, who was public about it. He was one of the few people at the time who was speaking out about this issue, this ideology, I guess you could call it, within the university. And he brought me in on the secret project to expose the ideology within the university before they had started writing. I guess that's the preamble.
Well, two quick questions. It sounds like there's an actual network out there of critics or naysayers. They just don't want to be seen or heard from for obvious reasons. Is that fair to say, what you've discovered?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time it was because it was probably way back in, even I would say 2014, 15 when I started doing this, and the world's changed a lot. I guess things like the project itself has kind of bulldozed the way for a lot more people to speak about this. But at the time, it was it would strike fear into an academic's heart to think about what would happen if people knew their actual perspective on these things. And so it was very, very bad, I would say, around somewhere between the 2015 to 2017. I think it reached a fever pitch with Trump over there in the US in terms of cancellations I mean, a lot of these academics were putting their career on the line to criticize a kind of orthodoxy that was emerging within the university, and it was affecting their research. There's certain areas of research that they couldn't explore and they wanted to, and there was certain findings that were very inconvenient to the orthodoxy, which you would turn a blind eye to. So in some sense, these people were they're molding knowledge from its source, which is the university, and so it's creating a kind of epistemological supply chain for activism within these institutions to produce, I guess, radically left-wing facts.
But also
and suppress inconvenient ones.
But they're also producing content that's not accurate or fair, ultimately, if they want to abide by the rules of the system. This is one question I've often wanted to ask documentary filmmakers, because you watch these amazing stories, and I can go on and on about different examples, but if this mission had failed, if your three academics, James and Peter and Helen, if they put out these fraudulent research papers and no one bit and no one was convinced that they were accurate, did you have a plan B? I mean, you invested so much time in this. Was there a way to kind of pivot if that were the case? Obviously, it didn't happen, and the docuseries is all the richer and more fascinating for it. But was there a plan if this didn't work out?
Yeah. One of the first things when Peter told me, he brought me in on the secret plan. I thought it was great because as a filmmaker, I always look for three things, which is a landscape, an interesting landscape, which was the university in this problem that I was looking at that was related, that I mentioned in the preamble. Secondly, I look for characters, and Peter, Helen, and Jim are definitely characters. And then the third thing that is required for me is some kind of story arc, like some kind of mission, or to get them to do something so I can track it, and it's not just talking heads being still. And so Pete told me about this project, and I thought, oh, amazing, everything has fallen into place here. But what happens if they fail miserably? And in my mind, I did think that they were going to fail. When I first came into this project, I knew that there was a problem here, but I didn't know it was as far gone as it was. And so I actually banked on this not working. And because of the environment, and because of these academics losing careers for doing things like this, I thought if they're putting their neck on the line, they could actually, if they did do this and it failed, this could be an interesting story in itself.
Yeah.
Because they were quite brash about their predictions about what they could achieve, and my God, did they achieve it in the end? But at the time, I did doubt them, and so I guess I made them promise. I said, listen, I'm going to cover this. I think this is a great story, and I'm interested in it, but I'm not going to construct something to make you guys look good at the end. If you fail, you fail, and I'm going to make a film about that. And maybe it was a less in depth, a short film or something like that. But that definitely was the plan B. Actually, it was to be honest with you, it was the plan A. The fact that they were so successful was surprising even to me, and I'd been looking at this thing for I guess a while, a year or two before I met them.
I've been recommending the whole series on social media and also my website, Hollywood in Toto. But to me, Chapter 2, Part 2, whatever you want to call it, is the most chilling, the thing you must see. It's set at Evergreen College. It involves Professor Weinstein. And I think some people know that story. And I've read about it, and I've heard interviews with him. But I didn't really know this much behind it. Can you just sum up that chapter? Because it's riveting, it's frightening, it must be seen, it must be shared. But you tell me, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, what your takeaway from that was.
Yeah, well, I might set up how it came to be.
Okay.
So, as I said, I'd stumbled into an intellectual underground, and so there was a lot of people who were very critical of this orthodoxy that was emerging in the university. And when I went to Portland to kind of shoot with Pete for the first time, he introduced me to several other academics who were in this underground, and two of those academics were Heather Heying and Brett Weinstein, and I met them. I like you had heard, I guess, I'd kind of seen the top level story of what took place in Evergreen, which is essentially Brett refused to participate in a day of absence, which is a day that was, I guess, was socially enforced inside Evergreen State College, where white academics would not turn up. It was a flip on a day of absence that they had before, which was based on a play where the black people in a town didn't turn up, and then the town obviously kind of went into chaos, and so their absence said something. It could be quite a poignant point. I'm not into it, but I think it's kind of fair to do something like that. Whereas Evergreen had gone so, I guess, far into this. It is racist in some ways. I would say it's actually outright racism to ask white people not to turn up. They were so far into this ideology that they flipped it, and they said all white people don't turn up to campus, and we African Americans or people of color, I guess, if they would extend that to other races, can be on the campus. And so this is the story that Brett said, no, I'm not going to participate in that. I find that ridiculous. And then the campus exploded into student protests.
And you're not being hyperbolic by saying the campus exploded. I mean, that's the most explosive situation I can imagine on a college campus, minus pyrotechnics, honestly.
Well, I tell you why I was so interested, because I found a piece of footage. So I'd met Brett and Heather. They told me about the story just casually over breakfast one day. And here I was thinking, oh, well, this is just another little tidbit. This is just another little story that I could potentially explore, but I wasn't too interested in it. And I started looking at the footage that was captured at the time, and there was lots of it. Benjamin Boyce, he was a student at the time. He was so, I guess, horrified and interested in what took place at that campus that he started archiving all the footage. So he was an extremely, how would you say, helpful resource in figuring out what the hell happened on the ground there.
Sure.
And there was one piece of footage that was shot at an event where at the college, where they kind of broke into a ritual where they all boarded an equity canoe. So it was a celebration of a diversity, equity, inclusion, some kind of bureaucratic plan that they had. And so they organized a staff and student event where they were celebrating it. And then at the end, they said, well, we're all going to get on this imaginary canoe, and we are going to I guess move down the stream to a magical land of equity. And you really have to see this to believe it. It was unbelievable. And at the time, I'd been looking at the religious parallels of this orthodoxy. It's definitely a moral orthodoxy, but there's this spirituality of grievance and guilt, and there's these kind of utopian fantasies of everyone being equal. So all this comes together in a kind of a cultish religion, and it's unmistakable when you start talking to these people and you're sitting in on their events and looking at their kind of recorded conversations, because there's a lot scattered across the internet. It's unmistakable there is some kind of spirituality attached to this, and I was trying to figure out how do I capture that? That's a very difficult thing, because we're really attacking scholarship. We're attacking papers. You can't see the spirituality in the papers, but when it gets off book, if it gets off the off text, I guess, and into people, it becomes very spiritual. And so I saw that piece of footage, and I thought, oh my God, I have to get this into the series. I have to get this into my documentary. And so I sat Brett and Heather down, and we went through the whole story, and I guess I used their storytelling as the backbone of a section of the film. Mm-hmm. And then I peppered it with all the archival footage, and it's come together quite well. There's an extended version of it as well. It's a 3-part standalone series, about an hour and a half's worth. But I've condensed it for the series. There's all sorts of it's a bit of a rabbit warren, this film. There are kind of lots of offshoots and conversations and different aspects to it. So I guess it's kind of it comes together as a body of work. It's very internet. It's more of a body of work than a kind of 90-minute presentation that you can sit in a cinema.
Yeah, it is fascinating to watch, and I recommend. I think you need the whole series to get the context fully, but oh gosh, that's the real kicker. A couple quick thoughts. One of the things I think is implied through a lot of what you're uncovering, or maybe even directly stated, is the violence. I mean, I think what happened at Evergreen could have been extremely violent. I joked it was explosive because I think that's a great way to describe it. But Professor Weinstein could have been seriously hurt or worse. Other people could have been hurt. Did you and your team, when you're shooting this, when you're assembling this, did you run into any violent situations or moments that you thought, I could be in harm's way?
There was a time. I'm not very scared of these people. I think that there's an Antifa element of it, which is more violent, and I guess they're kind of like, their violence is like a pack of dogs. There's lots of people coming up, and they're taking little nicks at people. I think if you look at how Andy Ngo is a journalist that got attacked by the Antifa contingent, and if you look at it, it's like a swarm of people coming and hitting him and hurting him. And so that to me, because they're quite weak people, really, there's something about being leftist and not actually having power but lusting after it. There is that antifa contingent, and that is very dangerous. I think that's horrible. But I think there is this inside the universities. It's more, how would you say, it's more a feminine force. It's like whispers and reputational destruction and threats. Like I think that, so in the series with Brett, I don't want to pretend that it wasn't dangerous. It definitely was. Yeah. And there were students roaming the campus with bats and things like that. But there's something about it that seems more threatening to me. They didn't. If you look at these people, you see the pictures of them. They're not very scary people. I don't know how to express it other than that, right? Okay. So that it was dangerous, and there was a point at which there were lots. The whole campus was crawling with angry activists, and they told the campus police to stand down. So Brett was wandering around the campus with. He was the kind of the main focus of their ire, and he didn't have any police protection. So I think that genuinely did get very, very dangerous. But as to your question of was I scared for my own safety, when I think about that, I never was really. Okay. There wasn't really. I think it's all reputational is the stuff that I've come into contact with. Well, that's not to say it couldn't turn violent at some point, but not throughout filming was I ever in a situation where I was worried for my safety.
Gotcha. When you look at the arc of the story, you think, Netflix and Hulu and these different platforms have been really scoring with documentaries. Anecdotally, I talk to my friends, my family members, and they often dig deep into those documentary niches, the lineups, and they find some great stories. Did you at any point reach out to a Netflix, a Hulu, an Amazon and say, hey, is this something you might be interested in? Or did you always think, hey, this has got to be an independent project from the start?
It needed to start as an independent project, mainly because I didn't really want to tell anybody about the underlying secret project, I guess, because that had to be top secret, and we didn't want to bring too many people in. Mm-hmm. That could have been one fault, because a lot of these kind of sales agents and producers like to get in very, very early so they can shape it. But I've had problems with here with ABC working on documentaries where I did have someone from the start, and I felt that their influence wasn't a positive thing on it. But that being said, I did, once we kind of went live with it and I had all this amazing footage, we definitely wanted a team. We wanted bigger funding. It was my producer, Mark Conway, and we've worked together on things for many, many years, but we were left alone, really. So it's usually with a documentary, you kind of get it to a position and then you secure some more funding, and then you can get a team and start collaborating. So this was a one-man band the whole way through. I didn't have any collaborators, and toward the end I was able to convince people to help me with the music and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it was very, very hard. Every time I tried to find a collaborator, they would watch sections of it and go, I can't do this, man. So it was kind of like it was a reflection of the university. I think that the film industry, and definitely the documentary industry, is an extension of the orthodoxy that we see in the universities. And so this was radioactive. And I think I've actually had a Netflix executive, because he had troubles with this orthodoxy. Really, I guess he was. How do you say, he left Netflix because he was asking too many questions about some of the directions they were taking, the kind of documentary side of it. And he loved the film. He was on the inside trying to do something with it, or with me generally, I guess. And it all fell over because you can't really look at these subjects. I should have known. There's a great instance of a disappearing film, which I think you might know of this, which is American Dharma. Have you ever heard of that film?
No, I don't think so. But
so this is Errol Morris. Errol Morris is a documentarian, a legend. I guess if you're in the documentary game, he's like a Scorsese or something like that. And so, me loving documentary and loving Errol Morris's work, for me to not know that he worked on a film, it was probably about 2018, 19, and I stumbled, accidentally into this film, American Dharma. And it was an Errol Morris film, and I was like, how the hell has Errol Morris released a film? And I'm only finding out about it 2 years down the track. And what it was he sat down with Steve Bannon after the Trump election and
I
asked
did
him
hear
questions.
about this a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, continue.
You've got to see this film. It's really, really good. He asked him questions and tried to figure out what was going on there, which is something that the left should have done after Trump's election. Is what's going on here? Look at the problem, or if even if you think it's a problem, look at it, reckon with it, speak to the people on the other side, share some of that content around, and have a bit of a reckoning. So Errol Morris tried that project, and Errol Morris is left wing, so he did it with all the I guess the, how would you say, the creepy music and fire and brimstone of that you would expect from someone who's left wing and talking to someone that was involved in the Trump campaign. And it was a brilliant film, but they squashed it. It was a disappearing film. So filmed by one of the best documentarians in the world, didn't get wide circulation. They booed him out of Cannes. It's a very interesting story when you look at it. And I think that had I understood that story before I went into this, maybe I wouldn't have even bothered, because it seems it's a good, I guess, how would you say, like, example of the film industry and what they're doing to any story that kind of doesn't fit the frame. And it is a strange occurrence, because if you see American Dharma, it is the reckoning that the left-wing liberal people should have had post-Trump, but they didn't. They squashed it, and here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
There is no reconciliation when you squash these stories, and you don't look into the other side and even contemplate that there might be some valid complaints there.
Well, I mean, but it's really important that people like yourself, that you are doing these stories, you are getting them out there. I just spoke to a woman who created America Invaded. I just reviewed The Coddling of the American Mind. So if Documentary Inc. won't make these stories, artists like you and other artists are doing it and filling that space and letting people know what's going on. It's really critical. Mike, thank you for joining the podcast. Of course, the movie is The Reformers. You can see it now at michaelnayna.com. That's NAYNA.com. Check it out there. You'll find links to all his other work, his Substack material. I really appreciate what you've compiled for us. I'm sad that it had to be compiled, but I'm glad it's out there, and I hope a lot of people check this out. It's going to open up a lot of eyes.
Thank you very much.
Stand-up comedian Chrissie Mayr is one brave broad, as we used to say in the Bronx. Not only does she defy the woke mob, she made a comedy album a few weeks back called Live from January 6th. That takes guts, and she's got them. She's also a trooper. She's been traveling the country telling jokes. That's not really atypical for a stand-up comedian, but she's 8 months pregnant, so she's got some fire in her belly for sure, and a little baby coming soon. Well, that might have been a mistake over the weekend, I have to say, because the reception she got at a New Jersey club, well, it was none too pretty. Now, she shared the news about what happened on social media. After the show, she was doing a meet and greet, very common with comedians. They reach out to the fans, have a little chit-chat, maybe even sell some merch. I don't know if she was doing that at this particular gig, but this is very common practice for stand-up comics. And someone doused her with pepper spray. Amazing, right? Just absolutely awful. Here's a woman who just worked, who just entertained people, who just made people laugh, and she's 8 months pregnant, and she's being doused with pepper spray. Now, on social media, she said she's fine, she's okay. nothing's wrong, but this could have ended up badly for her and the baby. But that's where comedy is in 2024. It's not enough to change the channel, turn off the radio show, don't go to that rowdy comedy gig that promises a lot of problematic jokes. People seem to want to take action to shut you down in one way or the other. It's just awful. Stay well, Chrissie, and I hope in a few weeks you'll be sharing pictures of your beautiful new baby. Let's get back to that Spinal Tap trivia question before we wrap up the show. Remember, the band is humiliated by not only playing a county fair gig, but being billed second behind, wait for it, the puppet show.
Oh, no. Right. If I told them once, I told them 100 times to put Spinal Tap first and puppet show last.
It's a morale builder, isn't it?
You got a big dress.
It's another classic moment from a classic 1984 comedy directed by the once great Rob Reiner. Well, that's it for the show this week. Thanks again to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your attention, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. This is its 10-year anniversary. It is updated 7 days a week. News, reviews, commentary, everything that's going on in Hollywood. It is, like this show, the right take on entertainment. See you next time.